Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
More violence, killings and unrest in Iraq. One person was killed in the southern city of Basra when gunmen in a car fired on Friday worshippers at two Sunni mosques. In Mahawil, south of Baghdad, one policeman was killed and another wounded when their car was struck by a roadside bomb. In Baghdad yesterday, 2 U.S. soldiers were killed when a roadside bomb targeting their convoy exploded. And in a separate attack, a third U.S. soldier was killed after he was shot at near the town of Iskandariya, south of Baghdad. Today, a foreign security contractor was killed while another was seriously wounded when a roadside bomb blasted their vehicle in central Baghdad. The explosion in the early morning hours also left a sport utility vehicle ablaze. The nationalities of the contractors were not yet identified. Earlier, an explosion in the same central area shook buildings and clouds of smoke rose into the sky over the U.S. green zone near the banks of the Tigris River. There was no immediate information of the cause of the blast. Meanwhile, hundreds of Shiite and Sunni Muslims took to the streets of Baghdad in a joint demonstration as a show of unity between the communities, in a sign that Wednesday's deadly stampede on a Baghdad bridge could become a catalyst for reconciliation between Iraq's two biggest religious communities. Protesters chanted anti-U.S. slogans as they marched down the streets. Following Friday prayers in the Shiite slum neighborhood of Sadr city, the cleric called for the resignation of Iraq's interior and defense ministers, who he said used their positions to serve their interests. While in another sermon in Al-Adhamiya Sunni neighborhood in Baghdad, a Sunni preacher said Iraqis were demanding an investigation into the death of thousands in the stampede on Wednesday. Israel has frozen plans to build 1,000 new settler homes in the occupied West Bank near Jerusalem, heeding U.S. opposition to the move. Israeli Vice Prime Minister Ehud Olmert made clear that the so-called E1 project, which could largely cut the West Bank in two and seal it off from Arab East Jerusalem, had been suspended under U.S. pressure. Palestinian Planning Minister Ghassan al-Khatib said the promise to freeze construction at Israel's biggest settlement, Ma'ale Adumim, is a positive step if Israel sticks to it. Meanwhile, Israeli Vice Premier Shimon Peres said Israel would complete a Gaza withdrawal within 1 month, but the main sticking problem was border crossing points. In the northern West Bank, Israeli forces raided the village of Hazun in a search and arrest operation. U.S. President George W. Bush has acknowledged that relief efforts after Hurricane Katrina have been unacceptable. Faced with victims' urgent pleas for help and mounting criticism that the federal government has been too slow to respond, Bush said many people had been working hard in the 5 days since the deadly storm struck on Monday, but more needed to be done. An emergency military convoy of aid supplies arrived in New Orleans to help in the relief of tens of thousands of refugees made desperate. More with Nida Ramhi.
Within the past 24 hours.
It has become the war after the Katrina storm. Thousands may have died. Hundreds of thousands have been forced out of their homes. Gangs of looters have forced police to lock themselves at their headquarters, and gasoline prices have soared to record highs at the pump. 30,000 U.S. troops poured into New Orleans with shoot-to-kill orders on looters, shooters, and gangs who were roaming the streets, as tens of thousands sat helplessly on streets and sidewalks near the city convention center, waiting for help and angry at why it hadn't yet come.
We have been in the water and on the bridge for days. Bush is not sending these people to help us like he's saying. There hasn't been extra food. There has not been extra military. Southern Louisiana has come in here and taken and helped us.
Although the National Guard continues to deliver relief supplies, its main priority has been to evacuate the flooded areas. The U.S. President, George W. Bush, called the relief efforts for the victims unacceptable and headed to the region to get a first-hand look. Bush's request for a $10.5 billion aid package for Katrina was quickly approved, but he said more aid was needed and that it should come from the private sector and the general public. He called on former presidents Bill Clinton and father George Bush to lead a nationwide fundraising campaign.
This recovery is going to be a long process. It's going to take a lot of hard work and patience and resolve. It's also going to require a lot of money. And the federal government will do its part. But the private sector needs to do its part as well.
The lack of efficiency in the aftermath of the Katrina disaster has plummeted Bush's approval ratings. This followed an already lowered rating over the Iraq War. The fact that most of the flood victims are black has added a racial element to the disaster. Nida Ramahi for Jordan Television.
Fears over a shortage of gasoline in the United States after storm damage to refineries are keeping world crude prices close to $70 a barrel. The U.S. government holds huge volumes of crude for emergencies but has no gasoline in state reserves. European Union officials appear to contradict each other over whether the EU will give oil to the United States after the hurricane disaster. But France, Germany and Spain said they were ready to send fuel across the Atlantic. The International Energy Agency has said a release of state European gasoline stocks is an option, but that it is awaiting a full assessment of the damage to U.S. refineries. EU Foreign Policy Chief Javier Solana said European countries were ready to provide petroleum if asked by the U.S. But British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw said that was not what the EU had in mind. Straw was chairing an EU foreign ministers meeting in Cardiff under Britain's rotating presidency. He said the EU was considering disaster relief and humanitarian aid rather than providing gasoline.
That frankly was not in people's minds because there's a world market in oil. Of course, there might be other assistance that could be offered, but I think what was in the mind of the foreign ministers was very much in terms of humanitarian relief, flood relief, and matters like that.
Well, we're in contact with them, and whatever they ask for, they will be given from reserves of oil that different countries are providing to any other thing that they may need.
إلى أمريكا نفسها التي وضعت الطبيعة تحت
Environmental factors put America to the test after the catastrophe of Hurricane Katrina. The world was shocked by the American administration's difficulties in dealing with the aftermath of Katrina and its humanitarian and economic consequences. The magnitude of economic devastation caused the American administration to say that it would tap into their strategic oil reserves, and the European Union said that it would offer some of its emergency gasoline reserves to help the United States in order to get through its energy crisis after Hurricane Katrina, whose effects still overshadow the state of Louisiana, especially with the spread of killing, stealing and looting in the damaged state.
وقوع الانفجارات واندلاع الحرائق ومناظر المشردين في كل مكان وحوادث السلب.
Explosions, eruptions of fire, and images of homeless people everywhere. Acts of stealing and looting were the main scenes in the fourth day after the invasion of the deadly Hurricane Katrina. The hurricane has caused a catastrophe along the coast of Louisiana, which was hit by winds blowing at 124 kilometers an hour. Then it hit Mississippi and Alabama, leaving behind thousands of demolished cars, boats, and homes.
Yesterday, fire erupted and smoke was rising due to an explosion of the gas line.
In addition to the tragedy in New Orleans, acts of stealing and looting have spread. People poured into the city, stealing electronic equipment and looting major commercial businesses. The situation compelled the refugees, who have been trapped in the Superdome Stadium in New Orleans for 4 days, escaping the hurricane, to compare their shelter to a detention center where they are subjected to the laws of criminals and thugs. Catherine Blanco, the governor of the state of Louisiana, warned with strong language against the consequences of stealing or looting, saying that the National Guard has orders to shoot and kill to end the violence that has spread in the city.
إنهم مجهزون برشاشات M16 مشحونة. These troops are armed with M16 machine guns and know how to shoot and kill. They will not hesitate to do so if necessary, and I hope they do.
The misery is not excluded just to the people, but also includes officials, which compelled a number of New Orleans policemen to turn in their resignations rather than face the violence in the city.
I understand those that have resigned. They have lost everything, and they feel that they should not have to face gunfire and possible death.
ويرى المراقبون أن نشر القوات الأمريكية فشل حتى الآن.
Monitors say that the U.S. forces deployment have until now failed to carry out an effective emergency plan, creating growing frustration among hurricane victims who are left to their fate alone.
I have a patient with me and I cannot give her medicine. I can't give it to her myself. I need help.
The media is not hesitating to publicize the government's fears about the possibility of a high number of people dead.
The government is very concerned about the number of people dying in hospitals.
من جهة أخرى قدر متحدث باسم منظمة الأمم المتحدة.
A spokesman for the United Nations Children's Fund said that the number of children who were made homeless by Katrina is about 300 to 400,000, expressing his regret that the main victims of this catastrophe are the poorest families. According to unofficial surveys, the hurricane created thousands of dead in Louisiana and Mississippi, the most affected and damaged states. Despite this fact, the American authorities have not yet confirmed the deaths of 125 people in Mississippi. In the face of the magnitude of this catastrophe, which hit 135,000 square kilometers, the White House finally announced that it will accept international donations that come from abroad, although President George Bush said that they would do this themselves.
The decision to begin legal proceedings against the 4 suspects came after Detlef Melis, leading an inquiry order by the UN Security Council, said he believed more people were involved in the bombing. Speaking at a news conference yesterday, he described the arrest of the 4 men as a very important step, but also cautioned that they were only part of the picture and the case was far from over. Detlef Melis, who was appointed by the United Nations after shortcomings in Lebanon's own probe into the murder to assist the authorities with a few inquiry, hailed the latest move by Lebanese authorities. A news conference yesterday described the arrest of the 4 men as a very important step, but also cautioned that they were only part of the picture and the case was far from over. Former MP Nasser Andir was freed on Wednesday, a day after the arrest, but Melis said he was still a suspect. Melis said the Commission had extensively interviewed the 5 suspects and was now going over their statements, but he cautioned that they remained innocent until proven guilty.
In these 5 suspects, we have arrested, in our assessment, are only part of the picture. So we'll have to further investigate, and we do think more people are involved.
Melis said the case was not closed and invited anyone inside and outside of Lebanon who may have information on the assassination to report it to the Commission. Melis said the team would provide security to witnesses and suspects who would need it. Melis said he believed more people could be involved in the killing than the 5 suspects already identified and arrested. He stressed President Emil Lahoud was not a suspect and said the Commission team was not recommending people to be arrested on rumors. Melis also said the investigation ordered by the UN Security Council has not uncovered any Syrian suspects linked to the February 14th bombing, which killed Hariri and 20 others, including MP Basel Fleihan.
I'm optimistic that these problems can be solved, because they will have to be solved, because without this cooperation we will not have the full picture.
He said the UN Commission of Inquiry wanted to meet any Syrian officials who had a security role in Lebanon at the time, but said that at the moment there was no specific Syrian suspect. Meli said investigators were now moving ahead with a detailed examination of the blast scene on the Beirut seafront with the help of Dutch, British and Japanese experts. Answering a question about the September 15th deadline for the UN investigation, Meli said the team had not asked an extension yet, but did not believe it would finish its probe by then.
We will not be able to finish our work.
لم تمر تحفظات الأمين العام للجامعة العربية عمرو موسى على مسودة الدستور.
The comments that were made by the Secretary General of the Arab League, Amr Moussa, regarding the Iraqi draft constitution had stirred disappointment by the Iraqi government of Ibrahim al-Jafari. Al-Jafari criticized the Arab League of doing too little, too late, saying it is inappropriate of them to comment on the Iraqi constitution. Al-Jafari also criticized the Arab League of failing to send an envoy or an ambassador to Baghdad. The Secretary General of the Arab League downplayed al-Jafari's harsh criticism, confirming that the Prime Minister's comments do not mean anything except that the two have different points of view.
The conflict between the different sectarian groups in Iraq is resurfacing once again after they lived together in harmony for many years. To resolve the conflict locally, the draft constitution was placed on the ballot to be voted on. Upon the approval of the Iraqi constitution, the Arab League held intensive talks with Iraqi officials regarding the identity of Iraq. The League criticized the draft constitution for the language used in regard to the identity of Iraq. The Iraqi legislators endorsed new amendments to some of the articles of the Constitution, a move that was hailed by the Arab League, describing it as a positive step. The Secretary General of the Arab League, Amr Moussa, summarized his reservations on the Constitution as follows. He rejects the idea of removing the Arab identity from the new Constitution. He rejects the division of the Iraqi identity. He objects to the fact that the Constitution does not refer to the role that Iraq played in the Arab world and its heritage. By failing to do so, the Constitution will stir conflict among Arabs in Iraq and in the rest of the Arab world. Moussa also criticized the draft constitution because it was not unanimously approved. And finally, the League disagrees with the Article of Federation mentioned in the Constitution. As Moussa described the Iraqi constitution as being flawed, the Iraqi Prime Minister al-Jafari defended the draft constitution and criticized the Arab League for the following reasons. The Arab League is too late to be concerned about the affairs of the Iraqi people. The League also failed to send an ambassador, a minister, or even a government official to Baghdad. They did not send relief to ease the suffering of the Iraqis. They are also interfering with an Iraqi issue that is not of their concern or business. And they're not reviewing their policy towards the new Iraq. The Iraqis are entitled to their opinion and stance, and the Arab League has its own reasons and justifications. According to Iraqi officials, the Arab League went out of their way to support the former regime of Saddam Hussein. Moreover, they did not recognize the sovereignty of the new Iraqi government that was sworn in after the collapse of the former regime. They are also still hesitant in dealing with the new government of Iraq, and they are still labeling the Iraqi war as unjust and illegitimate. However, the Arab League pointed out that they tried to solve the Iraqi problem peacefully to spare Iraq more fatalities. The League always wanted to help the Iraqis achieve self-determination without any foreign intervention. It is a vicious cycle that got worse by the current security situation. And as the date to vote on the new constitution nears and the possibility that the federation issue may divide Iraq into many parts, the country may be dragged yet into another cycle of violence.
The Secretary General of the Arab League denied having any problems with the Iraqi Prime Minister Ibrahim al-Jafari. In an interview with Abu Dhabi TV reporter Hani Omera in Cairo, the Secretary General confirmed that talks are going on between government of Iraq and the Arab League to strengthen their relations.
التدخل له معاني كثيرة. المقصود انه ان تعاون الجامعة العربية في العملية السياسية.
The intervention by the Arab League is meant to help the political process in Iraq. However, the bad situation there hampered the League efforts to accomplish its mission. The United Nations efforts were also slowed down by such situation. I believe that al-Jafari understands that. Our response to the crisis in Iraq was slow because the political situation there did not allow us. It is not because we did not want to. We are now holding intensive talks with many Iraqi officials, and I believe these talks are very constructive.
ومع ذلك احنا الآن في نقاش واتصالات أنا بتصور أنها بناءة، اتصالات التي جرت بيني وبين الكثير من زعماء العراق وكبار مسؤولين.
Jawad al-Maliki, a member of the Iraqi Constitution Drafting Committee and the official spokesman of the Islamic Dawah Party, which is led by the Iraqi Prime Minister Dr. Ibrahim al-Jafari, expressed his frustration with harsh comments made by the Secretary General of the Arab League.
أنا أعتقد هذه التصريحات فيها تجني
I believe that those comments made by the Arab League are false accusations. The Arab League and the Arab world are supposed to stand united behind the Iraqi people to lead them out of the current crisis. They are not supposed to hail the Iraqis with accusations, especially that the Arab League and the Arab world had played a negative role in the Iraqi affairs. Many Arab nations supported the former regime of Saddam Hussein. We inherited those problems. Saddam Hussein was the one who divided Iraq and created such a sectarian society. Now we are dealing with the political turmoil and trying to figure out a way out of this conflict. The Arab League owes the Iraqi people an apology for siding with Saddam Hussein. They are now criticizing the Iraqis instead of helping them. They are undermining the will of the Iraqi people who elected their officials freely in a democratic way, a free election that has never been seen in any Arab state.
Jubilation was in full swing across the Muslim world on Friday as the faithful celebrated the anniversary of Prophet Muhammad's ordainment. Towns and cities in Islamic Iran were also decorated with light, and people from all walks of life flocked to the holy shrines and religious sites, reciting eulogies to observe the auspicious occasion. Iran's chief nuclear negotiator says a report by the UN atomic watchdog on Iran's atomic program contained both positive and negative points, but that Tehran would continue to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency to work out a solution for the uranium enrichment issue.
Ali Larijani told the state television on Friday the newly released report includes answers to the question over Iran's nuclear case from a legal and technical point of view. He added, there are minor questions yet to be answered, which come mainly because of the pressure exerted by the US and Western states on the agency, being devoid of any technical and legal basis. Larijani's comments came immediately after a confidential report by the IAEA chief on Iran's atomic work was posted to the 35 member states of the Governors Board. According to the diplomatic sources in Vienna, the report by Mohammad al-Baradei has criticized Tehran for resumption of the UCF activities, while admitting that the previous suspension in the center has been voluntary and not legally binding. Some diplomats also say, as the report reveals, the agency's inspectors have not, to date, come up with a smoking gun suggesting that Tehran was trying to develop nuclear weapons. Earlier in the day, British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw told reporters in Newport, Wales, that the EU Foreign Ministerial meeting would not seek to refer Iran to the UN Security Council.
In the memory of those who sacrificed heavily in the Lebanese resistance against the Israeli occupation. The Amal movement is executing a plan of constructing 2 residential houses for 2 victims of the Israeli invasion. Amal is calling for the implementation of other similar initiatives in other parts of the country. The Lebanese actor Munir Kisrawani performed on the stage of the Kamel Jaber Cultural Center, premiering a new play entitled Public Citizen in the town of Al-Nabatiya. Proceeds from the play will be used to fund the project of building the 2 houses.
Southern Lebanon will not forget the sacrifices of the Lebanese people who gave up their lives in order to drive the Israeli occupation out. Moreover, Lebanon will not close its doors on those who defended its freedom. This is why the Amal movement is commencing a project to build 2 houses for 2 victims of the Israeli war in the town of El-Rihan. Those 2 youths confronted the Israeli occupation. This project comes to show them that the town did not forget about their sacrifices.
As the Lebanese resistance was escalated against the Israeli occupation in the south, the Amal movement started to discuss ways to help those who sustained injuries in the war-torn region. This is how the idea of the pledge and financial support was brought to us. We, in the Amal movement, embarked on a plan to build 2 residential houses for 2 of the victims in the town of Rihan. The wounded are Brother Hani Hassouna and Brother Khalil Nada, who sustained injuries while fighting enemy troops in southern Lebanon. Amal does not forget those victims who put their lives on the line for the liberation of the country. It is our duty to help those people who were wounded in defending our freedom, as our Shiite leader Imam al-Sadr urged us to do. This is only a small part of what we owe them, as they had put their lives on the line while resisting enemy troops.
This project comes as part of yet a larger campaign to help those in need as a result of the Israeli invasion. They are urging implementation of similar projects in the rest of the country.
We are at the completion phase of this project. It will be followed by more projects to help other people in other areas in the south. We call on all people with good hearts to extend their pledge and support to make these projects possible.
The resistance comes in the form of bullets and words. The Lebanese actor Munir Kisrawani premiered his play, Public Citizen, on stage at the Kamel Jaber Cultural Center in the town of Al-Nabatiya to fund this project.
Mr. Kisrawani is a great human being. He is also an excellent actor and a patriotic person. Upon hearing about this project, Mr. Kisrawani produced a play that is called Public Citizen to fund the construction of 2 houses in the town of Al-Rihan. Al-Rihan was the center of resistance against the Israeli occupation, where local residents withstood Israeli attacks and oppressions.
I, as an actor, resist the occupation in my own way. I join hands with the people of the South who fought the Israeli occupation for many years. As the Lebanese fought the war against the enemy, I was fighting in my own way by writing literature against the war. The victims of war are now in dire need of our help. We need to show them that we do care about them. Our support to those people is not coming out of apathy. It is indeed everyone's duty to help them. They sacrifice their lives for us, so we must stand unconditionally with them and support their financial needs. I'm not bragging about what I did because it is not a big deal to help those in need. However, the big deal is that those people had lost their hands and their eyes in the fight against the Israeli occupation. We must sacrifice with our lives for those heroes of freedom.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.